Hello, everyone. Firstly, I would just like to thank Outdoor Asia, Bhavna, to reaching out to me and giving me this opportunity to address this August gathering of the industry. Uh, so, while the topic that I have is about how brands can increase their spends in the transit media, the reality for me as a marketeer or a brand custodian is how do I optimize my dollars? So there are two extreme ends of the spectrum that we exist on, where you're looking at us to consider various formats of medium and increase our spends when we go out and do our campaigns. And while internally, especially I would talk about my own category, it's not a category where you have a touch, feel, sense around it. It's a financial category. And therefore it becomes all the more interesting for us to really come out with solutions, or how do we really optimize our spends and justify our ROI. So that's where I stand on the subject. Having said that, it's also an interesting time from a marketeer's perspective, that, unlike various other global geographies, we are a country which is very uniquely poised with multiple generations coexisting at the same time. So whether it's the millennials, whether it's the Gen X, whether it's the baby boomers, they all coexist in most cases in the same household. In certain cities, it's more nuclearization. In the other towns, it's more of a joint family approach. Third data point would be the fact is that we are a very unique nation where you have a India and you have a Bharat. And the gap between India and Bharat is shrinking. And it's shrinking for most of us. Many decades back, the opportunity was cited by the FMCG sector. In my own space, where traditionally our business model used to be targeting at the top key metros, and if I have to look at some data points of our own industry, majority of my own asset management or mutual fund industry exists in the Bombay-Delhi market, primarily because it's also the market where large institutions exist, and therefore there's a huge inflow coming in. And there is a lot of service-based clientele which pulls in their money into investment. But when you go down to the other towns, obviously the focus was restricted. So maybe around 8 years back when I joined the mutual fund industry, the conversations used to be about increasing share of wallet in the top 8 to 10 metros. Today the conversation is shifting right from the manufacturers, which is asset management houses like us, or whether it's the regulator. The constant conversation is about how do we grow towns, and therefore we have now an interesting classification which existed at top 15 and beyond 15 markets till last year, getting changed to top 30 and beyond 30, because they have seen the growth in those next leg of 15 cities who have now come in the top 30. So that's the background I just wanted to share with you and establish the fact that as medium, I think you are playing an important role, and there is significance value in terms of the transit media. So this next slide is no-brainer. All of you are from the industry. You're quite familiar with the fact that the transit industry comprises of various modes of transport, reference branding, whether it's the airport, whether it's the radio cabs, whether it's the bus shelters, or the Uber cabs of the world. What's interesting also I would like to highlight is that while we are focusing on this industry, and this is being the first industry conference around it. Back almost 2 decades when I was part of FMCG in the good old cola wars that existed when I was part of Pepsi, we used to have our own transit media, and these used to be the classic canter backs. So if you're familiar, the canters that would load the liquids or the crates which would travel around the city used to have a unique branding at the back, which even today you see it in most of the branded transport vehicles. But we used to have this unique place branding at the back where we would advertise all our new SKUs, product launches, offers for consumers, to the extent that media was so effectively utilized when we used to do deal clinching, turning out a Coke outlet into a Pepsi outlet. We used to give out our canters on the various stretches of the restaurant or point of purchase, where that used to be utilized to advertise that point of purchase. So yes, transit media is nothing new for me. It's been existing in my context at least for over 2 decades. I've also used it when it came to my first endeavor with financial services when I was driving ICICI Bank SME branding, and I launched the very first SME centric acquisition campaign where I drew the visibility out of the entire bus backs, where we ran an offer with the Reliance fixed wireless phone on a zero-based current account. So yes, it's quite a potent medium, and it's been effectively utilized in the mutual fund space. Also, we use it regularly on the bus shelters, even at the airport. We've done the train wraps in the past. So we've been active consumers of this medium. But what's interesting here when I see the data, and I think that's something which also puts a stress on how do we optimize our dollars. If you look at it in terms of the media split, and this is not data from me, it's a cast of numbers from Group M. We're clearly seeing that the television journey has been evolving continuously. It's from 2014 to forecast of 2019. We see it almost doubling. On the other hand, the print has been a relatively slow growth, but it's very potent and important tool, especially on the regional media content referencing. The print still dominates. The third, which is very alarming, is a player that never existed as a player of strength back in 2014, has actually grown 5 times compared to the outdoor space that you see, has seen minuscule growth overall in that same period. And that's the digital medium. And if you see the digital medium, it's fairly dominated by the Facebooks of the likes, where you have measurable matrices. There is a constant dynamic changes that are being brought in to establish the relevance of that medium, including the amount of engagement that medium or the value system or the ecosystem that exists on the digital space does with advertisers to educate them, to train them, to update them on the latest tools, taking them through active workshops, taking them through case studies, establishing constantly the relevant reference of the medium. And I think there's a lot of work that goes out there to ensure that they are growing, and that's clearly visible in the numbers. The other interesting part of this data is if you look at the radio, a medium which we erstwhile thought is just a frequency driver, a reminder medium, had some bit of competition with the outdoor, but would be lower down in this consideration, is almost catching up with the outdoor space. And if you look at cinema, again, it's grown 3 times over the years. So you see the whole metrics of how media is evolving, and as a marketer, when we are looking at media planning and we have our limited dollars, we have to optimize our objectives, and we have to really be pressed on which medium do we need to use. And when we are looking at it, we are not really countering as which media is better than the other, but the fact remains is how do I deliver an effective campaign when I'm choosing my medium? And if I have a limited spend, how do I really manage it? So those core objectives then tend to dominate our decision making when it comes to campaign management. The other point I would refer is in our own category. There used to be an era called the new fund offer or the NFOs, which gave us the advantage of really going out and spending 10-15 crore in a campaign at one go, and which meant that the marketer used very little of thinking and just used maximum visibility point, and therefore he just got down to spending. Today, that's not the era for us. We have to really justify. In fact, regulation doesn't even allow us to do those kind of spends anymore. Every money that we account for is accounted out of the scheme in which an investor is invested. So we have to be very mindful of what we are really getting down to and how do we really justify in terms of sales, how do we justify in terms of return to that investment, and that's the only way we now look at spending. So I clearly highlighted some of the matrices which are working in the case of digital, and therefore how do we really go about optimizing our spends. Moving on, so what's really the opportunity? So like I started off my talk by stating that there is an India and a Bharat. I clearly believe that transit media has a bright future. I think you need to evolve your point of referencing. I heard the earlier speaker talking about data being available, but data being secretive or restricted to utilization. But as a marketeer, if I have to buy that particular space, I need to be convinced that that particular space that I'm buying has got meaningful connect for me to go and attach my brand messaging to that customer segment. When we look at agencies coming and presenting to us, they come with a set of tools that they talk about, and they talk about how they buy their media. They talk about the relevance of that media that they're going to be choosing, the point of referencing, the catchment, the visibility. So there's a whole series of parameters on which a media is taken. But I haven't come across any agency post those initial presentation coming and doing a referencing in the same depth to establish the credibility of the plan that they're trying to pitch. It usually becomes a transactional plan which is governed by budgets and budget savings. And that's not really helpful, because it could be helpful in a short time or a short-term goal, but on a long tail, it will always be back of our mind when we are observing that media and we have limited dollars to spend in. So trust me, it's important for you to come back to us to the brand and establish the connect. Because if I am struggling hard or I'm maximizing my spend, which I want to do to a series of stuff that would help me to optimize my spend as well as maximize my impact of my campaign, then I rely on every service provider, every agency that's servicing me on my brand, whether it's the creative agency, whether it's the media buying agency, whether it's the outdoor agency, to really work that much more harder. I cannot be the golden goose that you kind of come and pitch, take the account, and then forget about it and serve me as per your transactional need. We are not interested in it. If we as marketers have to look at you with a little bit of serious as a partner, not as a vendor or as a supplier, then we need that partnership being demonstrated in your dialogue. It needs to come out to us that you're sitting and you have your skin in the game to help us, carve that journey. Maybe those models may not be scalable in the initial period, but they definitely have a future down the line if we test those spaces. And as a marketer, personally, I'm always open to testing new ideas and seeing the effectiveness of it. And that's pretty much demonstrated in what we run at UTI called the Swatantra platform. It's one of the flagship initiatives that me and my team drive, which is very unique in its approach. It doesn't go about with the classic marketing of just advertising. It works on the content principle of building the need amongst consumer and generating a conversation and then triggering the brand relevance in the minds of the conversation. And that's what we do across print, radio, digital. We've integrated all of that journey path. And so it's important that as members of the industry, if you work a little more and sharpen your outputs and build those relevance in the choice of medium, it becomes a lot more easier for us. So, and not only restricted to the time of campaign, build those conversations through the year, highlight the best practices. I saw some of the very interesting case study where the first speaker was sharing. I mean, those case studies can't be just award sessions. They have to be part of demonstrated work when the brand is building its journey and conversation for its customers. The other opportunity that exists, and you are very much placed to figure this out from the global practices, is that there is a lot of digitalization of the outdoor spaces. It's about measurable matrices coming out of it. It's about engaging beyond the level 1 of seeing the message. So I will take a crude example. So today when we run that Swatantra platform, its journey all became into staggered media platforms. It started off with on ground, then it went into a separate phase of a print, it went into television, it went into radio. So this year when we sat down to put this together, we said, let's put it on one principle. There is a customer at the center. There is a content that needs to engage with this customer, and there are multiple ways of engaging him. So today, the way we placed it, we have made it centric to a customer, multiple conversations across, more like an omni-channel approach, but content centric to those omni-channel, which means that I start my journey with a Facebook Live on a particular content, move it to print, expanding my content because print allows me taking it onto radio as a conversation with the expert, and then ending it on a website where I have traffic coming in. And I've built a linkage across all those platforms. Even the print media, we use QR code to track the traffic coming in, and those QR codes are linked to a UTM parameter, and similarly are all the other websites we promoted. So when you are talking about a digital conversation, and like the earlier speaker mentioned that at the airport you have a couple of hours, how do I engage with that medium? Can I just leave it to a message board? And if there is data, I can actually customize the messaging. You can help me customize the messaging depending on the time of transit. If it's the morning traffic, it's the business community, or it's a salary community, can I have a dynamic content feed available or a brand exposure built into it? And that helps me to sharpen and have the right relevant messaging going out to the right audience. Okay, so out of home should not be about just media sites, but it should be about creating experiences. It's about experience out of home rather than just out of home visibility point. Like rightly pointed out, and thanks to the way our infrastructure is growing manyfold. Today I myself spend close to, earlier it used to be 30 to 40 minutes from Lokhandwala going up to BKC to office. Today I spend over, an hour and a half. So almost 3 hours of my daily time is on commute, and 8 to 10 hours is outside my house. There is enough and more opportunity for transit media to engage with me. But what am I getting engaged on? I'm getting engaged on a Netflix. I'm getting engaged on Netflix because that's the time I utilize to de-stress. I'm using it to just watch my Netflix. But is there ways and means that transit media can catch my attention when I'm at the signal? Is there anything that I can do in my experiential zone? People who are traveling in the buses, you're doing bus wraps. Can I do an engagement within the bus for him? Can I do a QR-based messaging which allows him the next free ride? Can I, when I'm in the local, can I do something which is besides the wrapper of the local, which allows me to engage with the whole metro infrastructure coming in? What are those ways and means that I can engage him beyond just leaving it at a branding point? I think that's the solution we are looking at, and that's the conversation we want to have with our partners. I'll just play this one video just to establish the whole experience thing. This was done in the London Tube when the Game of Thrones was launched. Can you just play this?
We transformed an area so that people could see and actually sit on and get their photo taken on the Iron Throne. Not just that, but also they had the chance to see White Walkers, to hear PA announcements by Ned Stark. They could hear the theme tune played by buskers. It brought a real smile to people's face, and I think helped to launch Series 7 of Game of Thrones. It was great. So working very closely with the operational teams was important. Also, Exterior Media. So they are our media partner. We've had a contract with them since October. And between us and Exterior, we're looking to make the best of, the best use of the best out-of-home advertising estate in the world. And so thinking about what's the best things that are happening in London, what's the best things that are happening in the world, how can we bring those things onto our network in a way that engages the thousands of people that use our network every day. This for us is it's an example of the sorts of things that we can do. We've already got the most valuable outdoor advertising estate anywhere in the world. But we want to transform our estate, and we want to transform the outdoor industry. We can bring together advertising, experiential marketing, public announcements. We can also bring into that mix online, retail, with millions of people every day, with assets across London. For me, this isn't about selling posters on a wall, it's about selling to the most valuable, most diverse, most engaged audience anywhere in the world. I think, to be honest, there's only one man in London who should sit on the Iron Throne. He's our boss, he is the mayor, he's the person who is ensuring that London is open for business. I'm not sure whether he'd want to sit on an Iron Throne, but I'm sure he would look fantastic if he did.
So if you saw, they had the Game of Thrones being, they used the sensory of sound, they had a troupe playing the music, they had the elements of Game of Thrones. The amount of recall and excitement it created amongst people. I mean, a lot of you, I'm sure, watch Game of Thrones and are looking forward to the new season. It's unbelievable. Now, that's the power of how transit media plays up the whole experience around that catchment. So do not be convinced when your service source tells you, I cannot give you data. I think it's important for you to come back with data, because as marketers, it's getting difficult for us to justify our spends if we have no data. We are not interested in contactable data, but we need to know what are the demographics, we need to know what are the timing, we need to know what's the age segment, we need to know what's the time spent, we need to know the zones in which that time is spent. It could be different for the millennials versus the baby boomers. If you look at data around, the millennials are not talking about, and this is from a financial category, I'm saying millennials are not talking about aspirations like I want to buy my house, I want to own a car. They're talking about I'm okay with Uber, I want to rent a house. That changes my own category's approach to a millennial, which is very different than your audience, which may be happy with having a 3 BHK or a 2 BHK with an Oberoi or a Lodha. That's not their lookout. They're just saying, give me a rental space, and which is why if you see BKC is mushrooming with 1 BHK rental apartment or service apartment. So things are transforming. Today, the world is so connected. People are traveling overseas. There is access to information on the go. Look at what's happened yesterday. The amount of information that's just flowing around on WhatsApp group. Before we even know, we have all the data. Earlier, we used to just rely on AIR or Doordarshan. Today, we have access on the go. So things are changing in the consumer mind. It's the same consumer. And if you don't nudge him as a brand, and for me, when I have to nudge him, I need a partner like yourself to think and put your skin in the game to help me put a model which will help me to make it more impactful. The other thing that I see perennially a problem is, I have a mainline media agency and I have an outdoor agency. Back end, they both may be sharing a P&L, like Martin Sorrell used to do earlier. But when it comes to servicing clients, there are two different P&L, and then they may have another creative arm. So think of it, they all three sit down together and plan their budgets. But when it comes to service the same client, they look at it differently. So the whole question about how do I use creative effectively on a media and what is the best media seems to get split between three planning teams, three creative guys, three servicing guys, which I understand you can't change, but somewhere this whole thing about eating into each other's share is not going to work, because for me that's the same consumer. He watches, he hears, he sees, he engages, is the same guy. I can't say that I'm going to be very different for watching something and seeing something or hearing something. So how do you really optimize the planning? Because otherwise it's about, I want more dollars for TV because it gives me a better return on my plan for the client, or it gives me more money back as a media house. That's not the logic, and we are seeing through it. If I do 5 campaigns of outdoor in a market and I set my outdoor locations, I don't need to come to a media agency. And the other challenge that I observe is about the fragmentation that happens. There is no uniformity of media options. So I think that's not your challenge, but it's probably something which requires to be taken at an industry, so that you're able to optimize the media units across different parts of the city. And you have new emerging things, like I said, Bharat. The auto rickshaws, the cycles, the local transport. When we talk about Bharat, we don't seem to have options coming to us. We are told the standard hoardings. There are no other option that anyone wants to state it out to us. But when you go to local cities, there would be some more options available. So it's an outcome about deal making. It's an outcome of availability. I don't know. They put it at a transparency. When it comes to rates, agency says this is the rate, the owner says a different rate. So those are issues which we struggle when we are addressing this, and therefore, till those don't get settled, the optimization of budget, optimization of spend or increase of spend is going to be very hard for you. It's going to be very hard for me, because I'm not getting a measurability, I'm not getting an experience, I'm not getting an engagement, I'm not having price transparency, and I have the buyer of the agency and the owner of the site both calling me. Why? I don't have the bandwidth at the time. So those are some challenges. I'm just highlighting what we have experienced as marketeers. And I still think the future is very bright. All you need to do is, can I have the last video? Address this from the opportunity that's there to play up for you. I just wanted to share this with you. The future is really bright. I think you need to be rest assured you're in the right industry. Whatever takeaways you can take from my talk, I hope they can be of some help. But please see yourself as a consumer. When your consumption has changed in terms of how you consume content, people are talking, small children are talking to Siri and Alexas. We as financial category are today talking about creating content access through voice-based technology. Then why is the transit media not evolving itself to look at engaging with customers using these same very tools that are existing in different forms or are getting evolved? And globally, there are examples that you can pick up, like I saw in some of the case studies that were highlighted. Thank you very much.